Want a quick 10-minute wrap-up of the week's compliance news? Well, this is the podcast for you, 10 for 10, where Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, wraps up 10 top compliance stories which occurred over the past week. If you don't know, Tom has a daily news podcast, appropriately called the Daily Compliance News, and 10 for 10 wraps up the week. So get up on a Saturday morning, have a great cup of coffee, and check out 10 for 10, the podcast which gives you the week's top compliance news. Are you interested in upping your game in compliance through the use of AI and machine learning technology? Well, check out my latest book, Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Move to 2030 and Beyond. You can check it out in the show notes. I've got a link to the purchase at Amazon.com. Upping Your Game. 10 for 10 for the week ending June 21, 2025. Our first story today comes to us from the Wall Street Journal in the technology section. Edith Hancock reporting that the EU court advisor has backed Google's $4.7 billion Android fine. Google suffered a setback in its years-long battle against an antitrust fine after a top advisor to the EU's highest court backed a $7.4 billion penalty imposed by EU antitrust regulators over how the tech giant imposes contractual obligations on devices manufactured by its Android operating system. Google, the advocate said Google is wrong in its attempt to challenge this fine. She said the company had held a dominant position for years in several markets, and that she recommended that the judges uphold the fine, according to a press release. Next up from the New York Times, a former Interpol official, Vitaly Pirlog, was detained in the United Arab Emirates under an arrest warrant issued by his former employer at the request of France. He is wanted in France and his home country of Moldova, having previously worked for Interpol in connection with a sprawling investigation into a scheme that allowed wanted fugitives to get red notices, which are arrest alerts, lifted in return for payment to corrupt officials. The UAE Ministry of Interior said he'd been apprehended on Sunday of this past week and now faces multiple charges, including forgery, bribery, facilitating payments, facilitating bribery, and fraud. He formerly served as a justice minister and intelligence director in the Republic of Moldova. Next up from the Financial Times in the Opinion Outlook section, Christina Criddle asks, is it the death of the business card? She said that at conferences and specifically tech events, she's often provided with a lanyard which has a QR code that lets other people find her LinkedIn profile, or a device that enables conference goers to tap lanyards in order to connect. But it's not just on the West Coast. It's literally across the globe. She believes, or at least she quoted Devorah Zak, who said it's a generational thing, that some people still hand out business cards, but it was becoming increasingly so that you didn't need a business card. And that's certainly my experience, but I find it as a convenience item, certainly at conferences when you can collect almost immediately. Our second story from the New York Times features Mike Madigan, who is the former Speaker of the House in Illinois and who for decades was one of the most influential Democrats in Illinois politics. He had been previously convicted of bribery and conspiracy and wire fraud. Well, he was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison and a $2.5 million fine for his part in the scheme. Now, he is 79, so this could be, 83, so this could be essentially a sentence that will keep him in prison for the rest of his life. The court said he took the stand, he lied, you had to sit right here, you could have exercised your right to silence, but you got on the witness stand and lied, and the court certainly punished him for that. Next up, from Reuters, commentary that there are key takeaways for healthcare companies on the DOJ's corporate whistleblower pilot program. This has been a very successful program for the Department of Justice, and it looks like the Trump administration will double down on their using whistleblowers and the False Claims Act to fight fraud, waste, and abuse. Companies really need, what you need to do is call Mary Inman and tell you what you need for your program, but the bottom line is your compliance program needs to be more robust, and you need to listen to those within your company who raise their hand and speak up, because still over 90% of all external whistleblowers tried to blow the whistle in-house, and either there was no one there to listen, they were completely ignored, or worse, they were attacked. Our next story comes to us also from Reuters, which reports that the Boeing 737 MAX families of the victims of those crashes have vociferously objected at a court hearing this week on the sweetheart deal given by the Department of Justice to Boeing, particularly the no accountability, no oversight, no independent monitor, of course, the NPA, and they really are concerned about this. Given the recent 787 crash, perhaps the court will put additional scrutiny on it, but at least according to this DOJ, Boeing can go off on its merry way. Next up from Bloomberg, an IMF team has landed in Kenya to assess the impact of corruption. Its findings are expected to inform a new program requested by the government. It's called a governance diagnostic and will be shared with Kenyan authorities for their input before its release, or they'll be shared by the end of 2025, and it will be published once they get their consent. It's a part of the IMF's commitment to helping strengthen governance and anti-corruption frameworks literally across the globe. Next up, JBS. Remember them? Well, they had the top FCPA fine of all time at one point. Well, this week they went public in the United States. I can't really think of a bigger win for compliance programs than the JBS case. They had a massive corruption scandal. The two brothers who ran the company were complicit up to their eyeballs in it. And the company paid over a $3 billion fine, although that was later reduced somewhat. So to get them to the point where they can go public in the United States is a huge win for the compliance function in the company. I know some of the people who work there, and they've worked very hard, very diligently. So kudos to JBS for their huge win. When you couple that with the recent Wells Fargo having their asset cap lifted, you begin to see that compliance really does work, even in the most corrupt, culturally bankrupt countries there are. Our next story comes to us from the AP, which reports that the Vatican has beatified a Congolese customs worker who was killed for resisting a bribe, giving young people in a place with endemic corruption a new model of holiness, someone who refused to allow spoiled rice to be distributed to poor people. The head of the Vatican saint-making office presided over the beatification ceremony at a basilica in Rome outside the walls of St. Paul, and the event drew a cheering crowd of Congolese pilgrims and much of Rome's Congolese Catholic communities. So I think this is the first time on record we've had anti-corruption beatified, certainly by the Vatican and Rome, so congratulations for that. And our final story is Mike Liddell. Remember old Mike? Well, he claimed that the 2020 election was rigged. He named names. He named companies. He named individuals. Well, he lost a $2.3 million defamation case and has now been ordered to pay, although given his bankrupt status, good luck on collecting that money. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll visit with you again next weekend on 10 for 10. I'd also urge you to check out the Daily Compliance News, which posts every week from Monday to Friday, where I give 4 curated stories of bribery, corruption, and compliance events that will allow you to help you start your day as well. So check out the Daily Compliance News and subscribe or rate and review to both 10 for 10 and the Daily Compliance News. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency. Finally, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, I am preparing a new season of Adventures in Compliance where I go through the 4 novels of Sherlock Holmes. Hear it on the Compliance Podcast Network.